And maybe they'll hear the good news.
Or get fed in a way they didn't expect.
That's it. Okay, ready, Freddie? All right. We're in Daniel chapter 3, verses 13 to 27. And I've entitled this, Go Along to Get Along. Is that good advice? And it's funny, you know this to be true. I know. You go buy a particular brand of car. I'll just use that example. So you go buy a Toyota, particular Toyota. Or maybe you're just thinking about getting one. And all day long, all you see are those Toyotas, wherever you go. It's like a conspiracy. Well, I wrote this several weeks ago. And boy, I've had some downtime at home, and so I've been looking at a lot of John MacArthur's little topical sermons and so forth. And one of the bad things that's going on right now within the church, and within the church I'm saying within the Christian church, is that the churches are willing to compromise and go along with what's going on just so that we'll all get along.
Keep your numbers up.
And if you're compromising on there's a time for compromise. Anybody that's married realizes that you can't have it your way all the time.
Well, in any relationship.
Yeah, that's right. Any relationship, that's very true. There has to be some compromise. So you can go along with somebody's idea just so you can get along with them and everything will be fine. But when it comes to our faith, we don't want to start compromising on the important issues. And so we have now many full-on denominations that are doing things that are completely anti-Christ. They may not think so. They may think that they're just getting along. So they're going along. But we know that Jesus said, I will not leave you or forsake you. Even though he was not going to be on the earth with his disciples, and he was going to ascend into heaven, he wanted them to know, I'm not going to leave you. Don't worry. And then Eric brought up that verse about it is expedient that I leave you. It's necessary that I leave you, because if I don't leave you, then the Comforter, the Holy Spirit, cannot come. And when the Comforter comes, he'll be with each and every one of you in a way that you have not experienced before. But in order to enjoy this promise, his promise, about not leaving us or forsaking us, we have to believe his promise. We show our faith in him, our belief. Belief and faith are pretty much the same thing. by our words and our actions. So you can say, oh yeah, I believe what he wrote. I don't show it in the things that I say and in the actions that I do, but I'm not, but I do believe it. So this is what Jesus said. He was referring to false prophets at the time, but in Matthew 7:20, Jesus said, by their fruit you will know them. This was how false prophets could be spotted. They say all the right things, but they were hypocrites. A hypocrite is a person who says one thing and does another. Of course, God knows what you believe. So the king, when Nebuchadnezzar we're speaking of, the palace tattlers.
Tattlers?
It's funny because there's an interesting little British piece of, what's the word? This is a little expression called tittle for tattle. If I'm going to tattle and tell you something, what are you going to give me?
Stitches.
Yeah, exactly. So, the tattlers were the astrologers. They were the people within, they were the, quote, wise men. Not to be confused with the wise men that traveled to worship the king.
The Magi.
The Magi, yeah.
They were the big cheeses before Daniel came along.
Yeah.
They were jealous.
The king was told of the disobedience of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Of course, Daniel was in the palace. It's kind of interesting how he wasn't included in this, because he certainly was guilty as they were of the things that not worshiping. The astrologers had also mentioned that they didn't worship the king's gods, plural. But this is all happening after this golden statue was made 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide. But it wasn't just that, it was, when they hear the music, they're not bowing down. But they don't even worship your gods. They know, don't you know how to push the button of somebody?
Mm-hmm.
You know what's important to them? Oh, I'll tell you one thing. All you got to do is be mean and nasty to somebody's kid. You got an instant enemy. Of course, when the king heard this, he was enraged.
Mm-hmm.
To have somebody be openly disobedient. I mean, you could see if you were sneaking around and you were doing the wrong thing, but that's not what this was. This was openly. We're just not going to do it. And he doesn't really even bring up the fact that they prayed to Yahweh, to the one living true God, and prayed to him 3 times a day. They didn't bring that up. So the king, and I find this extremely interesting, because here's Nebuchadnezzar, who is a perfect tyrant, and he didn't have to give these men any kind of day in court. He could just say, "This is what you guys are doing, so off with your head." But the king, the next thing in verse 13. he had the three men brought before him. He wanted to hear from their own mouths, had they really done the things they were being accused of? So in a normal court of law, you have a prosecuting attorney that says, so-and-so, we're accusing him of doing thus and so, and the judge or the juror, I'm not even talking about jury trial, but the judge doesn't just say, oh, well, then you're guilty because you've been accused of it. No. You got to have at least two witnesses that say you did it. And also, there's an interesting comment, which I'm sure you'll recognize. Then the question is put before us if we're in a court of law. How do you plead? How do you plead? So what are the two options?
Tell the truth or lie.
No. How do you plead?
Guilty
Or not guilty? And you can say, I plead insanity because I'm crazy about this girl.
Nobody in the right mind with parking the passing lane.
That's right, exactly. So the king said, is it true that you do not serve my gods and worship the image of gold? So he, just in case I misunderstood with these astronomers, and he said, and look, the kings may have been enraged about it, but he knows these guys. He knows what's going on here a little bit. Verse 14. He then tells them what the punishment will be if their disobedience continues. So he's not saying, you did it once, that's enough. Okay, we're going to put you into the furnace. He gives them one last chance. And he says, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if not, what awaits them? The furnace. You can choose door number 1, get out of jail free card, or you can pick door number 2, which I would not suggest you choose. The question is one of faith. Should they go along just to get along? How important is this for them to believe? Because if you worship these other gods and worship this statue, then what you're saying is, all I've said before this about worshiping Yahweh and only one God, that was just, well, for that particular time, it kind of changed. Now that I'm going to be thrown in a furnace, then I'm changing my mind.
Yeah, it's called being a witness.
Well, I love the answer. Then the king challenges God. So he says, what God, this is out of verse 15, what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?
Whoa.
The God that gave you that.
If you're thrown into this furnace. When this act of faith has been tested, then he will know the true God of creation. Nebuchadnezzar will. I bet you he's never met anybody that didn't just fight and yell and scream and try to do everything they could to keep from. Now the defendants had their chance to speak, which again is amazing. If this is the way the law system was, or the court system was in Babylon, there were some good things about it. O king, they said, We don't have to defend ourselves before you in this matter. Verse 16. Now here's a good object lesson for us today. Many times we'll be up against our own trials. We need to respond just as these boys did. Okay, and this is what the boys said. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it. And he will rescue us from your hand, O king. Verse 17. In other words, you're saying, and what God is going to rescue you? This God is going to rescue you. Rescue us. But then here's the part. This is the part we don't like. Because we all want the miraculous saving from our situation. But now he says, but even if he, meaning God, does not rescue us, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold.
Just so you clearly understand.
Yeah.
We're not doing it.
Yeah. Whether you,
No matter what the consequence.
and I would imagine there must be the king probably never entered the mind of the king, well, what if we threw them in the furnace and they survived the furnace, then we'll let them go. Now,
That ain't gonna happen.
these furnaces, I found this extremely interesting just because I find it interesting. These furnaces had a set of bellows. You know what bellows are?
Blow air.
Before they had motor-driven pumps to pump air. So when they wanted to increase the heat of the fire, then they'd have, maybe instead of 2 bellows, they'd have 4 bellows with guys pumping air into there and watching the flames. I think what the boys are saying is, and I don't know if it falls, whether Nebuchadnezzar understands this or not, but right is right and wrong is wrong. You don't see it this way, but in our eyes, to worship another God other than the one living and true God is wrong. And if I don't take a stand, if I just go along with your plan just so I can get along and not end up in the furnace, then what good is my faith? It's a time when you, and believe me, we will all have to come to that point where we have to say, this far and no further will I go. Just not going to. In other words, if we're on the side of righteousness, which is God's righteousness, then we've got nothing to fear, even if we don't survive the physical trial. Now, once again, don't confuse this for the person that says, I was driving the getaway car for my buddies and we were robbing the liquor store and I got caught. Now, in their little warped mind, they think this is a trial they're going through of their faith. Well, if God really wants to save me, if God really loves me, then he'll save me from this. That's not what we're talking about here. You got yourself into that mess. There are going to be consequences for your actions. You're going to have to suffer those. But if it comes to doing what you know is the right thing to do, and you choose not to do it, then you have every right to call on the promise of God and say, I'm not going to do this. This is the wrong thing to do. This is not going to go well. If God is with us, how's the rest of that go?
Who could be against us?
Who can be against us? Romans 8:31. That's what the boys are saying. If God is with us in this furnace, or in this trial, who can be against us? When an all-powerful king has his back up against the wall, so to speak, generally speaking, if he's somebody like Nebuchadnezzar, he pushes, there's pushback. He attacks. He doesn't allow himself to get pushed into a corner or against the wall. And this is exactly what happened. After the king had heard what the boys had to say, he blew up in anger and he commanded that the furnace be made 7 times hotter.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Get those other guys on the bellows and, pump this baby up. He'd show them how powerful his gods were. So they were bound, which is kind of interesting because I'm sure they bound them with rope. I don't know how long that rope was going to last, but
Just to protect themselves.
verse 22 and 23. However, the heat was so great that these big burly soldiers that Nebuchadnezzar had bind them and going to throw them in the furnace were killed because they couldn't even get near the furnace. It was so hot. So the soldiers died, but the boys fell into the furnace, or were pushed into the furnace. The king's expression went from anger instantly to amazement when he looked in the furnace. Weren't there 3 men that were put in the furnace? Verse 24. Certainly, O king, came the answer. But now I see 4 men walking around the fire, unbound and unharmed. And this is what Nebuchadnezzar said. And the 4th man looks like a son of the gods. So he looked like a deity.
Probably brighter than the fire.
Yeah. Walking around in the fire. Then he approached the blazing furnace and he shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. So they came out of the fire without even a sign of smoke or fire on their clothing. Verse 27. Did the king have a spiritual awakening? We'll see. No doubt God will have his will be done. There's something at work here, and because we have hindsight and we can look at things, we just know that he's dealing with a king of a kingdom that's the Babylonian kingdom, which was at least in that part of the world was the all-powerful. And his effect would be overwhelming to the rest of these people. So out of this, we get what Matthew chapter 10, verse 28 says. Do not fear the person who can kill your body and cannot kill your soul. But rather, fear the one who can kill both your body and your soul in hell. Just because somebody kills your body, it's your soul. It's your soul that goes on to live. So it's a kind of a and my guess is that you're going to be up against this challenge in your life of, what do I really believe in? What am I really willing to take the hit for? Am I willing to just go along with whatever the status quo is, just so that everybody will be my friend? Or a church that says we're going to allow all kinds of ungodliness to go on inside of our church, and just because we don't want to see our church numbers diminish, as if that's somehow the end, the focus. And there's a lot of, so choose this day who you will serve, Joshua. As for me and my family, we will serve the Lord.
Either you look at the world through the lens of the Bible, or you look at the Bible through the lens of the world, and that's going to...
And that's very dangerous.
Yeah, that's how you're going to lay your priorities out.
Okay, Mr. Gross.
Yes, sir.